You're listening to a Look Back Machine shorty. Today's episode is on 1994's Black Beauty, directed and written by Caroline Thompson. Thompson had helped write The Night Before Christmas and Edward Scissorhands. Doesn't exactly sound like a perfect match for Black Beauty. However, one of her other writing credits was on the very popular Homeward Bound. Here's that story before we get to Black Beauty.
And so Homeward Bound, to do a remake of Incredible Journey, which was a movie from the 50s, was my idea. So I was on board from the start, and I was working with an executive at Disney called David Vogel, and I had pretty much free reign to do the first few drafts, and then I was fired. Now, I did not know that they had brought on another writer, the great Linda Woolverton, nor did I know, here, hang on to your hat, I didn't even know they were making the frickin' movie, period, the end, that I had initiated until they asked Danny Elfman to write the score. So they had shot the entire film. The film was in the can. The film was probably mostly edited by the time I'd even realized it had been made, which is like, I mean, hello, how horrible is that? That's like the definition of assholic in my mind. But at any rate, how hard is it to pick up the phone and say, by the way, your movie is getting made, or here's a T-shirt, how about a crew hat? I mean, honestly, so they'd made the film. This is just before Babe, so the animals' voices are thought bubbles, essentially, not moving lips. It's a party. You could put anything in their mouths. I was brought back on the film to do a voiceover pass for the animals, which I felt justified in being called back to do the film, because screw them for not having told me in the first place that they were making it. So I did a voiceover pass. I can't even remember how many passes I did. And the second time I got fired was when we showed the movie to the then head of Disney, called Jeffrey Katzenberg. And he invited us to his house to screen the film. So it was my voiceover pass, 3 very different actors. So Donald Sutherland was the golden retriever. Annie Potts was the cat, and John Cryer. He played the young dog. Okay, so those 3 actors were, and I can't remember who did the score, but it was a score. We screened the movie for Jeffrey Katzenberg. He had his twin 8-year-olds in to watch the movie with us, because the studio executives love having their kids be the ultimate arbiters of whether a movie plays or not. The assholes, excuse me. I don't know. Am I allowed to cuss on your show? So these 2 little kids are in watching the film with us in Jeffrey's Beverly Hills mansion in his whatever big screening room, and their nanny comes in about 2/3 of the way to the film and whispers to them that it's time for their tennis lesson, and takes them away. Jeffrey concludes that his kids didn't like the movie, so anybody who could get fired got fired. I got fired, those 3 actors got fired, and whoever had done the score got fired. Because it was just sort of like, well, we can start over from these people. Let's do it. So they brought on, I don't even remember who they brought on to replace me. I know Ed Solomon, a friend of mine, was asked to do a rewrite, but he refused, because he said, I can't write anything better than what she's already written, which, bless his heart, he said that. So then they hired the new actors and brought me on again, I guess. I don't know, I did get fired 4 times, so I'm kind of forgetting the timeline of this, because it was very traumatic. But anyway, they brought me back on to do yet another pass. I did another pass. They fired me again. They brought me back on again so they decided eventually, and I don't know if Dwayne told you this, to do the post-production. And this was like history's longest post-production. Probably not, but it felt like it. They gave it to the animation department to do post-production, because, where else do you have voice acting but in animation? So they gave it to a man whose name I've luckily forgotten, because he was a horrible human being. And it languished there in the animation department in post. And so he decided that he was going to have the groundlings in to spitball lines for the animals narration, and and said to me, "Well, okay, so you write down what they say." I said, I am not a stenographer. I think this is a terrible idea. And by the way, I'm quitting. And he said, "No, you're not. You're fired." So that was the last time I got fired. They ended up, I don't know what happened in the growling session. They ended up not using any of whatever they did, I presume, because they just stuck with the narration I had written. And that's what you saw on the film. And so when I went to the preview, gosh, I might be getting this backwards because it might have been with the original actors. But anyway, when I went to the preview and I felt what the audience felt, I knew that movie was going to do a huge business, and it did. And Dwayne did a great job. That man, he, from what I understand, because I did not know they were shooting, he just would grab a camera and run. Like there's the chicken coop scene and some turkey or something. I don't know. Dwayne apparently had grabbed the camera and shot it himself. And but he and Jonathan Shaw, who cut it. Jonathan was, I guess, the editor of record, and he later cut Buddy for me. I mean, they just did a brilliant job. They did a brilliant job. I mean, Dwayne was not great with the human actors, but I think he was sort of saddled with a couple of kids that were really, really hard to work with, just to get good performance from them. But he did a great job. He did a great job.
From the writer of The Secret Garden and Edward Scissorhands comes an unforgettable motion picture of a timeless classic.
Beautiful horse.
Race the wind. Know the courage. And feel the magic of Black Beauty.
Well, there was a fair amount of resistance when I said I wanted to direct the film, and there should have been, as I said, I had no experience, but I did know horses, and I did know when I thought something worked and when I thought something didn't work. So I figured I had some skills, and they did come in good stead. But yeah, they were fairly resistant. So I actually enlisted for the producer, a man called Robert Shapiro, who had been the president of production at Warner's in earlier years, and all the executives hated him. And so I thought, oh, great, he's the perfect person because he knows how to manipulate them. He doesn't care that they hate him, and he was very cunning about because the thing about production, as you probably know, is that if you just put your head down and do it, very few people will actually say no. So I was in Italy. Let's see. So I had a scheme. My scheme was, I thought that that Homeward Bound: Incredible Journey would do great business, and I was absolutely right. It was a huge hit. It was the first February hit, particularly of a family film. So I calculated turning in my script to coincide with the success of Homeward Bound. Okay, check, click, did it. Good idea. and then I was on a vacation in Italy working on the next draft of Black Beauty, and enlisted the producer, told him what was going on, and he said, "Okay, we're going to meet in England and we're going to start scouting locations." And I'm just like, okay. So somehow he got the studio to give him and me the wherewithal to go start scouting locations in England. And so we just marched. So we spent a week scouting locations in England, sort of started to set up an office, came home, had a goodbye party, and got on a plane in the end of April and left until November. So we just put our feet down and marched, and that's how we got it done. So I had worked in England on Secret Garden the year or two before, and I'd met a number of directors over the course of my work, and so I took every director I knew in England out to dinner and asked them, what I was in for. Basically, they all said, "Oh, just you wait," and burst out laughing. But Stephen Frears said, "Well, you're always going to want to go back to the last location or set because you'll have new ideas." after you're gone. So do your best to keep things built and keep close by so that you can go back if you need to. So none, of course, is easily made to happen, but that was pretty funny. And he barked at me laughing. Everybody laughed when I asked them what I was in for. Well, so there were actually 13 horses who played Black Beauty. The head of physical production at Warner Brothers was an old cowboy named Phil Rollins. And he said, there's only one wrangler who can do this. His name is Rex Peterson. Do you know how to use a blow dart? He asked me. I was like, what? And he said, well, you know, Ace is the name of the horse tranquilizer. He said, you know, the horse isn't going to need acing, but Rex is. He gets kind of overexcited and very intense about his work. So I learned pretty quickly to always shoot the rehearsal of any given scene because the wrangler was more relaxed. And so the horses tended to work better when he wasn't so wound up. So he had a horse called Justin who had played Black Beauty in a Canadian television series. So these are all what are called Liberty horses. So Rex would use a pair of long whips like semaphores. He never hit the horses with the whips. It's just sort of however they're angled and whatever voice commands he gives, they understand, you know, to come, to rear, to pretend, fight, to etc. And for Ginger, he had this amazing horse called Hightower, who was famously the best horse in the movie business and was luckily a chestnut horse like Ginger. And then we found a little gray pony in one of the valleys here, and so we flew those horses to England and then built around them to build up the various ages of Black Beauty and the various skills that Black Beauty needed to do. So, for example, when David Thewlis, the cab driver, was driving the horse, he had no idea how to drive a horse, but that horse was a really good driving horse. So, you know, up he sat on the box and manipulated the reins ever so slightly, and that horse worked perfectly for him. I think that's sort of the best description of the horses. I mean, I did have sort of a difficult time with the stunt coordinator. I think he was promised my job. I don't really know, but he was a tough egg for me. And so there was a scene where Black Beauty runs down the hill to see Ginger and she kicks him in the face. I don't know if you remember that moment. And obviously I didn't want to put my hero horse at risk, and I didn't want to put any of my hero horses at risk. And plus, Hightower, who played Ginger, was a gelding, and I knew from knowing horses that if a stallion comes racing up to a mare, she's going to turn around and kick him in the teeth. So, which is what I wanted. So I asked the stunt coordinator to find me a chestnut mare in England. And he actually turned to me and said, oh, I don't think there are any chestnut mares in England. Well, if you drive down a country lane, pretty much every third horse is a chestnut mare. So he had an attitude that eventually shifted in the course of shooting, but he had an attitude of not being terribly helpful. But he was the only one. Everybody else was enormously helpful. I mean, my prop master had been David Lean's right hand man, and the production designer had designed for David Lean. And I mean, I had like thousands of years of hoary old white men experience surrounding me to make the film, and they were not used to being asked their opinion. Not only are they a film crew, but they're also English. But I think eventually they came to prize my prizing of them. Well, that was pretty late in the shoot. And so by that time, the stunt coordinator and I were friends, which is good because it was really on him to help make sure that went safely. Well, funnily enough, Alex Thompson, the director of photography, came to me with the pages of the script and said, well, what's the light source? So I was like, what do you mean? He said, well, I don't know how to light this scene because there's no light source written into the script, obviously, other than a fire. So I don't even remember how that went down, but I can remember thinking like, oh, Caroline, you're such a clever writer. You don't even think about the practical matters of shooting a scene. So, but that scene went very smoothly. The thing about a horse is if you turn and face it and pull at it, it will turn into a mule on you. You just go meet a horse and try it. If you turn your shoulder to, you turn your back on a horse and walk with a line, the horse will walk with you. So it was pretty easy in terms of the animal behavior to get the horses, resisting and not wanting to come out and all that stuff. And there was real fire, so it was something else. And you asked earlier about casting, and casting was really, really fun. So I had a big crush on Eleanor Braun in Women in Love, which is a movie you may or may not know. She plays this very, lovely person called Hermione. So I met with her and said, so basically I want you just to do Hermione. And she was like, all right. And she was, had a fantastic life. She was one of the early players in a Cambridge theater troupe with Peter Cook and Dudley Moore. She was in Help and actually kissed John Lennon. She was in that marvelous Peter Cook and Dudley Moore movie about what was it called? Bedazzled. And I cast Peter Cook in the film to play her husband, Lord Wexmere, and it was the first time they'd actually been around each other in many, many, many years, and they renewed their friendship and began to write together again after that. And David Thewlis, who plays Jerry the cabbie, who's the nicest man in the world, had just come off a Michael Lee movie called Naked, where he played the most horrible person in the world. And he was so grateful to me to be able to play a sweet man. I remember he showed up for a test screening in Santa Monica, and all the little kids recognized him afterwards and swarmed him. And he I've never seen anybody so happy, because he said after Naked, people would see him across the street to get away from him. So casting was really, really fun. It was something I was comfortable doing. So I was so exhausted by the time I chose Alan, and I had a lot of temp tracks done. I mean, including Christian Bale, who was about 10 at the time. I think he was 14 or something. Actors that were kind of around, which is so funny to think that it was, actors who were kind of around were people like Christian Bale. But by the time it came to do the final casting, for which I, by the way, got a bit criticized, because Alan has such a palpable Scottish accent, and Black Beauty takes place in Wiltshire, which is in southern England, but I kind of set it in northern England between Sean Bean, who has a very broad northern accent, and then Alan, who's got a Scottish accent. But at any rate, by the time I cast Alan, I was so exhausted, and of all the people I met, he was the most delightful. So I just cast the person who was the most fun to be around. And I thought he did a fabulous job, and we're still friends to this day. So I think I did well. I had pneumonia twice, and I was at that time a very heavy smoker. I lost 30 pounds. I had pneumonia twice, and basically, unless you're dead, you can't stay home as the director. So I got propped up quite a few days and croaked, action. I was just exhausted. My adrenals were blown. I was so stressed. Because I don't know how people do that job, to be perfectly honest. I did it a few times because I wanted to prove to myself that I could, but it's a weird job. 18 hours a day and we had night shoots, and it was so freaking cold and wet. And I'm just not a person who enjoys being freezing for 12 hours at a time. So it was tough. And I basically came home and collapsed into bed for as long as they would let me before I had to go into the cutting room. But yeah, it was exhausting. God. But no, the horse movies, generally speaking, first of all, they would put the humans front and center, and the horse would kind of be window dressing. And I wanted to do just the opposite. In fact, one of the actors didn't realize that their leveler mic was still on, because a director is mic'd into the remote microphones of actors, and he didn't realize I could still hear him. And he was saying to a fellow actor, "Can you believe the director asked me to get out of the way of the horse?" So the horses were my main characters, and that's how I treated them. Fascinatingly, at the time, and movie making has changed so much since then. In those days, you were really close in touch with the studio, and the producer was an adjunct to the studio. So it took me a while to get my feet, but at that time Warner's had a brilliant thing. They had the most marvelous editor on the planet named Dee Dee Allen, who had cut Bonnie and Clyde, for example. I mean, she was just a kick-ass editor. She cut Reds. They had her on retainer as a consultant. So she would watch dailies for them and with them and say, this person needs to go back and shoot more. This person's lost, or this, blah, blah, blah. And there was a day upon which she declared that they no longer had to worry about me, that clearly I'd gotten my feet on the ground and knew what I was up to, and they should just smile and let me carry on. And Warner's at that time did have the philosophy of get out of the way of the filmmaker. You're just going to be an impediment. And so they were actually really, really good to me. They gave me what I needed. They sent over a new line producer because I wasn't really getting the support on that front that I needed. And then when, as often happens, we had a fabulous preview. I mean, it scored, higher than anything else that year. So instead of being in one tiny cutting room at a studio that is now called The Lot on Santa Monica Boulevard, I then got a suite of rooms because the movie had scored so well. But then they kind of screwed me on the release date as far as I was concerned. I mean, that was the summer of Lion King. It was the summer of Forrest Gump. It should never have been released as a summer movie. They should have released it in the autumn or in that wonderful February slot that we discovered with Homeward Bound. But I got lost in the shuffle. And sadly, the movie did very little business, though it did sort of. I mean, it made its money back eventually. It wasn't hugely expensive to begin with, but it made its money back, and I'm sure they're in the black by now on it. But so it's just support is from a studio, at least in my experience, is so flibbity jibbity. It just depends on how your latest score went. Oh, I got pneumonia in the middle. I mean, I had pneumonia twice in the middle of making that film. Oh my God, it's so epic in my mind. I spent years reshooting that movie in my dreams. Years. I finally have stopped dreaming about it, and it's 25 years later, maybe. But so, gosh, I think about it all the time. I really do. I mean, I'm really glad we had a huge pre-shoot. Huge is an overstatement. We had a couple of weeks of pre-shoot, which was, I think, some of the best footage we got. So that the footage of the horses running across that spit of land and rearing together, and a lot of the poetry was captured by a second unit on the fly. And then there was the last day of shooting where actually for the only time we had to shut down for weather because we needed, I can't even remember why we needed sun, but it was completely socked in. And I said, okay, well, let's throw the horses in that field together and roll camera and see what happens. And that was so one of our Black Beauties was called Monkey. He was my favorite one. He was so fast. That shot of Farmer Gray just flying on a horse, that was Monkey. And we threw Monkey and Hightower and I can't remember which Mary Legs, because we had a couple doubles for the little gray pony, into a field together. Maybe it was just Black Beauty and Ginger. Anyway, that's the day that Black Beauty just hopped around and reared and bucked and played and tried to get Ginger to play with him. And it was like we just took advantage of everything we could think to do. It was also on that day that, I don't know if you remember the shot where Ginger's in a pen. It's a dream, I think it's a dream that we used. We improvised around the on the fly footage we got, which really delighted me. And so so again, it was the last day of shooting, and Ginger's in a pen, and Black Beauty is taken away from Ginger and throws off the halter, which is the piece of tack that you put around a horse's head to lead it. Throws off the halter and runs back to Ginger. Completely done on the fly, and just because we had film and had extra time, and we decided to, come up with something and roll camera. Those were the most fun, where it was just sort of like, well, what the heck, let's do this or that. often, by contrast, when I was given a set to work in, I was just, I mean, I did get a ton of help from everybody, from my script supervisor, who's the genius Mickey Clapp, to Alex Thompson, who eventually, who was the DP. I mean, people really, and John Palmer, who was the operator. They really did stand by me. But sometimes, I mean, I flunked geometry in school, so my sense of like space is pretty retarded, and so I wasn't as comfortable on any given set, but I was comfortable when we could go like, well, what if? Those are my my happiest memories, the what ifs. And we had so much fun. We also went out to a big ranch where a famous old wrangler, had 30 horses standing there, and we went and made like the best horse sound collection, which I know people still use because I can recognize. You take a horse away from its friend, you get the kick-ass whinnying, and we just got some incredible, made a really, really sophisticated horse sound library. I was very, to a fault probably, but I was obsessed with, mostly when you see a horse on screen and it's running across screen, you hear a whinny. The horses don't make that sound while they're running, by and large, especially if there's a rider on them. Maybe if it's a stallion, racing toward the mares, it does. But, seriously, you seldom hear that. But if you observe a movie with horses in it and you see a horse running, there's that old saying in the movie business, see a horse, hear a horse. Well, I was just determined for it to be a much more authentic visual and aural experience. And I'm really proud of that. I actually don't write anymore. I'm now an oil painter, by and large, for my outlet, and I love painting dead people. And I remember the time people said, like, why did you do something so sort of lyrical and poetic as Black Beauty? Why didn't you do something harder edged? Why did you do that film and not, because you could have done anything? And I was like, well, I don't know. It drew me. It's what I love. It was the poetry of it. It just made my heart happy. But it was a funny choice for me, given what I love. Though my granddaughter loves horses and Day of the Dead, so I guess it's all in the family.